So we're quarantining ourselves from coronavirus, which, by the way, is a bad, serious situation. But I'm going to talk about fishing and tips and things that you can think about fishing this time of year. I've had a lot of questions that have come to me via Facebook and Instagram about what do you do after the spawn? What are you thinking about as the fish leave the beds? And there's two schools of thought you got. They're either going to go deep and get out on ledges. Sometimes it's the first ledges that they come to, the shallower type stuff. Sometimes they go all the way out to the main river ledge. It depends on the lake and it depends on what kind of bait. And every fish is not the same. The other thing they do is they stay up shallow and they feed on bluegill and they feed on shad, they feed on frogs, they feed on stuff that's up there in that shallow part of the water column. And so when I'm thinking about those fish and how I would attack those, one bait or series of baits I'll always have on is topwater. Everybody loves throwing topwater because it's exciting. You see that bite. But one thing about topwater is it catches big fish. I'm going to talk a little bit about the different classes of topwater I like throwing this time of year, kind of in that post-spawn period, and talk a little bit about what line I would use and some other different factors. And so probably the first one I think about is throwing a frog. And here's my frog box. I've got a lot of different kinds of frogs. I've got a little pipsqueak right here. I've got a sexy frog, I've got a pad perch, and a popping perch. That's 4 different frogs. A couple of them got cupped lips, some of them got pointed lips. And why do you throw the different ones? Well, the cup lip gives it a little bit more splash and spray out in front of it. They'll all walk. You can walk all of them back and forth. Some of them you want to skip. Some of them, if you want to try to skip and get under something, my favorite is a Strike King Sexy Frog because it'll actually skip up under cover really well. Different situations require different frogs. They've got some unbelievable colors. I want to show you this color right here. Strike King just sent me that right there. Look at that thing. That's a pad perch. That thing is just awesome looking. And here's another one that just come out with this one right here. Look at that. That's phenomenal. When you see those colors, it just makes you want to throw it. It's sexy and it looks good to me. It's also going to look good to the bass. Frogs can be thrown in any situation. The coolest thing about them is you can throw them hard up into cover and don't have to worry about it. I fish them on a fairly heavy rod. Sometimes I throw them on a 7.4, sometimes on a 7 foot. It kind of depends on where I'm working it. One key that is really critical to me is I always throw it on braided line. When you're fishing topwater, you can't fish fluorocarbon line because fluorocarbon is a dense line and it sinks. When that line sinks, then basically it'll sink the front of your bait down and it just doesn't work properly. So I'm going to do 2 things. I'm either going to go braid or I'm going to go braid to a monofilament leader. This is Sunline 25-pound supernatural monofilament, and I can actually take this line, put a uniknot on there and throw it through my rod guides really good. And so some topwaters, I can tie a braid directly to the topwater, and some of them you need to go with a monofilament leader because on some various topwaters, and I'll show you one of them right here. This is a popper, KVD splash, and when you work this bait right here, if you put it on straight braid, it'll end up tying. You'll basically it'll get looped on there. That braid is such supple line that it'll sometimes catch different parts of your bait. And so if that's the situation, then you put a monofilament leader. Otherwise, I'm going to go straight braid. With a frog, I'm going to go straight braid. Another class of topwater I love throwing this time of year is a buzzbait. I've actually got a Strike King Super Toad on the back of it. For some reason, I've started fishing my buzzbaits with toads on them. They get a lot of bites this way. It keeps the back end really buoyant. This is a 3/8 ounce buzzbait. It's probably my standard go-to. You can throw a quarter, you can throw an 1/8, you can even throw a half, but 3/8 is the one that I like very most. And then probably the bait that you got to talk about the most this time of year is a walking bait. It does good around bluegill, it does good around shad, it does good around kind of post-spawn fish or fish that are just coming off the beds, and that's a sexy dog. Now that bait right there, this is a bluegill color. This bait right here, what it does in the water is it walks back and forth, but as you walk it, you can do different things. Sometimes they want it, to go sideways and then come back sideways again. One of the big keys to fishing any topwater that you're trying to work is is you need a rod that has a little bit of give to it. If it's just a real stiff rod, it's a lot harder to work a bait side to side. You want it to turn, pull it, put a little slack in it. You just don't want to pull it very hard. You just barely pull it, and it'll make it go like that. And then you barely pull it again, and it'll flip it back the other way. Whether it be a frog, whether it be a KVD splash, whether it be a walking bait that's just a pure walking bait like a sexy dog. All of those baits, make sure your rod, you can work that rod really softly, and that bait will go back and forth really well. You know, topwater is something I love to throw. I always got them tied on. I usually have 2, 3 topwaters tied on at any time, but this is some of the best time of year to throw it. Get a topwater in your hands. If you can keep social distancing and get out there and fish, well then great. If you can't, work on getting your tackle organized, do the other things, practice casting, do whatever you can do to stay sharp. But topwater, this time of year, will catch some big bass.